Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gerontological Society of America's Grant Chat, Developing a Research Trajectory. I'm Dr. Patty Slatum, a GSA visiting scholar and professor emeritus at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I'm a member of the grant writing program work group at GSA that is putting these sessions together. Grant funding is an indispensable step that we all need to conduct the work that we want to do to advance the science of gerontology and to promote optimal experiences of aging. Those things that GSA is all about. Obtaining funding can protect the precious time that's needed to pursue the topics that are of greatest interest to you and to advance your career, to facilitate training, and to improve your prospects for future grant funding. So this grant writing series of 1-hour virtual sessions is designed to help you win grants through bolstering a broad range of grantsmanship skills specifically tailored to your work as a gerontologist researcher. The program is supported by the GSA Innovation Fund, and today is our inaugural grant chat featuring a panel discussion with peers, experienced researchers, and leaders in gerontology on developing your research trajectory. And before we begin today's program, I'd like to provide a few logistical considerations. Please keep your audio on mute during the event and submit your questions for the panelists through the Zoom chat. We invite you to view the event in Zoom speaker view, and the grant chat is being recorded and will be available after the event. I am joined today by GSA members Dr. Gail Towsley, Associate Professor at the University of Utah College of Nursing, and Dr. Zachary Baker, the Robert L. Kane Postdoctoral Fellow in the Division of Health Policy and Management in the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. And they will serve as co-moderators, and they are also part of the work group that's been planning these sessions. And I'm going to turn it over to Gail.
Thanks, Patty. So to open today's grant chat, I am honored to introduce our panelists, and we are delighted to have a distinguished group of GSA members with us to share their perspectives on developing your research trajectory. First, we'd like to welcome Dr. Laura Gitlin, an applied research sociologist and distinguished professor, Dean of the College of Nursing and Health Professions, and Executive Director of the Age Well Collaboratory at Drexel University. Dr. Gitlin is nationally and internationally recognized for her programs of research on developing, evaluating, and implementing novel home and community-based interventions that provide quality of life of racially and ethnically diverse older adults and their family members, including people with cognitive, functional challenges, and/or mental health challenges. She is a well-funded researcher, having received continuous research and training grants from federal agencies and private foundations for over 35 years. She is also the co-author of a grant writing book in its 5th edition called Grant Writing: Strategies for Health and Human Service Professionals. And look for the chat for a full reference of that textbook. Next, we'd like to welcome Dr. Lindsay Miller, an associate professor at the Oregon Health and Science University School of Nursing, and an early career investigator focused on interpersonal relationships and behaviors in older adult couples and their impact on health and well-being. Dr. Miller joined OHSU in 2018 after completing an interdisciplinary postdoc fellowship at the University of Utah. Next, we'd like to welcome Dr. Elvin Price, the Victor Yanchek Associate Professor and Director of the Geriatric Pharmacotherapy at the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Pharmacy. He is the co-director of the VCU Institute for Inclusion, Inquiry, and Innovation, ICUBE, Health and Wellness in Aging Core. Dr. Elvin earned the Doctor of Pharmacy degree from the Florida A&M University and his PhD from the University of Florida. Dr. Elvin studies the impact of geriatric variation on aging, cardiometabolic homeostasis, and pharmacological responses. Dr. Elvin is enthusiastic about optimizing medication outcomes for older adults, fighting cardiometabolic diseases, reducing health disparities, and educating the next generation of healthcare practitioners and pharmaceutical scientists. We look forward to an engaging and enlightening conversation. And I'll pass it on to Zach.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah, so thanks to all of our panelists being here today. I thought we'd kind of start with a really broad question to open things up. But again, please do throw questions in the chat, and we'll prioritize those over the ones that we've written down. So we just wanted to start out with what things are important to consider when developing a research agenda.
Well, I'll throw a few ideas out, and I think the idea is that we will build on each other's thoughts and converse. And so there are a number of factors that I think are important when developing a research agenda, but I always start with what you're passionate about. What question is it that you really want to answer? Because developing a research trajectory and writing a grant is, a lot of dedication of your time and effort. And so being passionate about an area that you want to have some impact on is really where you need to begin. And typically, where do research questions come from? They come from wanting to answer questions that have scientific impact, and also come from possibly our own experiences, whether they be personal, familial, or professional. And then you have to match passion with the funders, right? What's available in terms of what are the agencies, federal and foundation, interested in funding. So you can be really passionate about something, but no one really cares about it. So it's always matching and shaping one's passion to what's fundable. And then of course, really staying on top of and knowledgeable about societal trends and what are the big public health questions. That's obviously what NIH in particular is most interested in addressing. So those are just three factors I'll just throw out there to get us started.
I can add that I was thinking about this question, and this isn't meant to sound trite, but I think having an agenda is the most important part of developing a research agenda. So to me, it doesn't involve a blank page that's being filled in as you go along, but agendas are created ahead of time and then used to stay on target. So for me, leaving room to explore new interests and some whims, especially those that are strategic or involve maybe an opportune collaboration, is important, but then go back to your plan often. So what are your own novel ideas for the next 2 or 3 studies you would conduct as a PI if someone handed you the funding right now? I think if you can't answer that question, then the problem is either that you're too entrenched in someone else's research agenda, or that you need to carve out the time to do some concrete planning and decision making about your research interests.
So I'll add to what Laura and Lindsay have offered so far. One of the things that's important to consider when starting a research agenda or developing a research agenda is the environment that you're landing. If you can start early and evaluate the places that you are interviewing to determine what's plausible there, and to sort of check the temperature for support for the type of research that you're interested in doing. If you can evaluate those things before you land there, you can plan better, and you can make the choices on landing in an environment that will be supportive for your career. I think that's very important.
That reminds me of some advice that I think I probably read in Laura's book and have heard a few people mention to me, is when you're writing, training grants, whether they be Fs or Ks, you're really paying a lot of attention to who your mentors are, because your mentors are going to matter as much for those awards as as you or the research that you're doing. And so you really can't say, I'm going to go learn qualitative research without a qualitative researcher on board. I guess to kind of align what align everybody's thinking here. When you think of a research agenda or trajectory, what's the kind of timeline you're thinking of? Are you thinking of tenure clocks, or 5 years, or 40 years? Or...
That's a hard question. I just wanted to build on one point that Lindsay said. I mean, I think I graphed this out, like I have a graphic picture of like in this, like a circle where it states like my main mission, what area do I want to develop in, what do I want to impact, and then spikes being what are the studies that may contribute to that to keep me on track, and then to see also it allows me to be flexible to see what kind of funding opportunities there may be, and to evaluate the funding opportunity in terms of my overall goal and mission. And if it's an important sub-study that would get me there, then I'm going to go for it. So I'm extremely flexible in terms of thinking of timeline for any one study. As an interventionist, interventions develop over time. So they have their own trajectory, right? And from idea inception, and if you're going to take it all the way out to past efficacy, effectiveness to implementation. So that is actually just another very complex conversation, because you could work on one area, one particular intervention as in your career and go from development to pragmatism and implementation, or not. So I think the kind of research you do also affects the timeline. I would pass it on to Alvin and Lindsay to talk about it in terms, if they wanted to, in terms of tenure clock and all of that, because those are the environments really important as well. And there's a lot of pressure, obviously, after a postdoc to go right into an R type of grant. I actually grew up in an environment where there wasn't tenure, so my timeline was kind of very different. So, but I appreciate that is one of the factors that are considered in developing a research trajectory.
Yeah, I'm also in a place that doesn't have tenure necessarily, or at least not everyone is on a tenure. Most people are not on a tenure track position. I think for a while it was being phased out, and then we got a new provost, so we'll see where that goes. But I'm still early in my career, and I think the milestones have been pretty prescribed so far for me, with PhD graduation, postdoc, faculty position, early career award. So having an appointment at an institution that supports my research, and then having that time supported to do the research, are the fundamentals for success in a research career. And that was the timeline I was on. But it has been a pretty long and arduous road just to get those basics covered. And so I'm now at that exciting point where I finally get to see if all this training will pay off, and if it was effective as I go up for my first R01.
So thinking about timelines. So my first faculty position was a tenure track. It was a tenure track position, and it came with the clock that's usually associated with a tenure track position. One of the things that was exciting and that made the opportunity good for me, the university had a provision to allow for faculty to have their clock frozen in the beginning, and then to revisit that starting their tenure clock with their annual evaluations with their department chair and dean. And so some universities still have flexibility around when the clock can start. So there may be a clinical line that is available, or whatever mechanisms that are available to give you time to get grants submitted, to get papers done, like things that you may have been working on in transition, to give you some relief from the pressure of having your clock started immediately. The university that I started my career at had an allowance for 2 years up front with having the clock frozen, and that was offered to me before I realized that I wanted it. Like, I didn't want it at first. I was like, what do I need it for? It was like very bad way of thinking about the opportunity. And my mentors said, you need to take this. And so I took the opportunity to have my clock frozen. It was one of the best decisions that I ever could have made. Coming from training, the only thing that I knew was success. I had a couple of grants that were not funded, but I got them funded in different ways. And I had the protected environment of my mentors. And it was such a wonderful environment that all that I knew about was success in my mind. Like, I didn't need that 2 years of protected time, but I really did. Because when I landed, there were lots of things, new responsibilities that were added that were outside of the protected space of being a trainee. So it's very important to consider the amount of time that it takes to fill a lab with bodies, with people, to fill a lab with equipment. If you're building a lab or if you're building a research group, it still takes time to hire people. It takes time to go through policies and procedure training for a university, transferring things, creating lectures if you're going to have teaching responsibilities. And it's important to consider the amount of prep time for preparing all of those lectures and then submitting your grants and your papers and all of those types of things. So it's important to have a good idea about how much time that takes, and to have a realistic estimate of how much time that's going to take, because it takes a lot of time. And then after realizing or having an estimate of the amount of time that it's going to take to get applications out, to get courses started, all of those things, then you can set realistic goals for year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But without that, you can't even set realistic goals without really understanding the processes and procedures. So lots of planning.
I was going to ask a follow-up question that came in from the chat, because some of the comments are about this kind of negotiation with your administration. And I'm thinking that some of that negotiation even needs to happen as you go into the position, not trying to change it afterwards, right? And so these things do take a ton of, all these things that you're talking about, Alvin, they really do take a lot of time. That's been my personal experience too. A lot of things to balance, and really learning to lean on mentors for help in those transitions and how to navigate them, because I think we all go in, we've never done it before when we take our first faculty position, and yeah, there's a lot to negotiate. And I don't know, Laura, it looks like you might have something to add to that too, but it's coming through from our participants today.
Yeah, Patty, I was going to say something very similar and build on Elvin's point. And I think it's really critical to have a mentor who can guide you through the complexities of academic life. And I think that there is this impression that you can shortchange, or or it's not the amount of time it takes to develop a course or to teach in a course is not fully recognized, and really relying on a mentor or mentors to help you understand that. And obviously also to jumpstart a research trajectory is just very, very critical. And a mentor who can help guide you through the politics and the complexities of academic environments. And they are different and they have different rules. It's just really essential. I think I agree with your point. I was going to say the same thing, Patty. I think it's very difficult to renegotiate a position once you're in a position. And so when you are applying for your first faculty position, it's very important to understand that dynamic. And as a research faculty and wanting to develop a research and a grant trajectory, I think it's very important to be able to pose a research area that you're really passionate about and what the potential funding mechanisms are to support that program of research. That's what the chairs want to hear, the dean wants to hear. You know, what have you thought about and how are you thinking about, how sophisticated are you in terms of your research questions, and do they have fundability, if I could say it that way. And so having an idea, although you may need mentorship as to whether it's a K or what kind of K, or if it's a R grant, you may need mentorship in that, but really demonstrating that you thought about these things, you've been on the websites, you have some ideas, you talked to possibly a program officer about some of your ideas, are really important and to showcase that in a negotiation for a position is very important.
Maybe worth mentioning there that Laura has both worked at different schools and holds a dean position, and so has gotten to kind of be on both sides of that issue, I imagine.
And I also want to say that I did just like Lindsay, I grew up as a researcher in a non-tenured environment. And so I think the importance of that is and I didn't have a postdoc and I didn't have a K, and there's just many different pathways. I know that people come to me and say, I didn't, do I have to have a K? Or there's just many different pathways, and it depends upon your environment, as Elvin has said, how ready you are with your research questions, and what funding mechanisms are out there. It really depends on all of those factors. It's a multifactorial decision-making process, if you will.
I think maybe related to that, we've talked about some of the things to consider. What does your environment mean for the kinds of the way your research trajectory is going to look, and what you apply for, that there's different paths that you can take. But I'd like to ask each of you what role serendipity has played in your research agenda. What kind of happened by chance and you're like, all right, I'm going to roll with it.
Yeah, I think serendipity does have a role. And that's, I think you have to be careful. And that's why having a clear, a broad area of inquiry that you're passionate about, but being flexible to look at it at different angles and so forth is really important. But serendipity occurs when you have an amazing finding that you didn't expect, and you want to pursue that more, and there's funding opportunities to do that, for example. Or there's a new request for applications that's addressing something, really important. Look at all the COVID monies that were set aside by each of the institutes of the National Institutes of Health. So honestly, that's not in my mission statement per se, but it's very relevant to the work that I do in family caregiving. And therefore, I'm going to pursue funding through supplements to explore the impact of COVID on family caregivers, for example. So really being very, so I think there is a role for serendipity. Not everything is serendipitous, but you want to be flexible and poised and, take advantage of opportunities that may happen either in the data that you find that may lead you down a different path than you initially expected. So I think you have to be open to that.
I'll add that I'm not yet enjoying the phase of my career where I have, multiple lines of research open and able to add on supplements. And I really look forward to that, Laura. But the role that Serendipity has played so far in my, again, fairly prescribed path of going through the pre-doctoral, postdoctoral, and then the K award phase has mostly been around collaborations. So I think when there's a need for help or for expertise that most early career people, researchers will encounter, just fulfilling that need, not necessarily with who you already have on your bench as mentors, but reaching out to new collaborators or new other experts that you haven't connected with yet has, for me, led to some serendipitous ideas that I'm looking forward to pursuing now. Yeah, serendipity, I think it can come in multiple ways, but really those connections with other researchers has been the most, I guess, just pleasurable aspect of research. When I think of serendipity, I think of it being pleasurable. So,
one of the examples that I can give is, well, it'll be slightly long story, but I'll make it short as possible. I am originally from rural North Florida in a former tobacco town. So like shade tobacco farms. And I saw an enormous amount of diabetes, heart disease, strokes, cardiovascular death as a child. And so this was interesting to me. And I always thought that maybe medications didn't work well for everyone. So this was this idea in my young, untrained mind. And when I had an opportunity to make it to graduate school, and on one of my first lab rotations, there was a study going with a diabetes drug. So it was exciting to just learn about that drug, to do some of the work that was focused around that drug. And then that drug was rosiglitazone. And then the DREAM trial was published around 2005, which showed that this drug was associated with these increased risk of fractures and like terrible, terrible, terrible. So this drug that I kind of fell in love with met a pretty fast demise based on adverse effects of the drug. But I fell in love with the family of receptors that the drug worked through. And my mentors allowed me to develop a project based on the genes and genetic variability in that family with this failed drug. And it worked out well. And, so now I had this family of genes that I was in love with. And as I finished training, I wrote a beginning grant and aid to the American Heart Association around that gene. And when I got my reviews back, they said that I wasn't studying a problem of cardiology, I was studying a problem of aging. So in that rejection, they forced me to find, or they suggested that I find mentors in the aging space. And in doing so, I found an enormous support structure in the Institute on Aging at my, at the university that I was at the time. And my work grew beyond the traditional cardiovascular world into the world of aging. And that led me into this space where I am now. And that came through rejection. So the rejection hurt in the short term, because I was like, this is a great idea. And, but it led me down a path of a much more impactful line of work that I was too narrowly focused on to think about in the beginning. So you can learn from rejection. In that same time, in one of my professional organizations, I was matched with a mentor who I met with once a month for an entire year. And that person was Patty Slatem. So that's serendipity.
And it was good for both of us. But you're right. Sometimes things just, they just happen, right? And I think we're seeing a question here in the chat that is a little bit related to this, is that if anyone has experienced working with a career coach, because a lot of the things that you all are talking about navigating, it can be hard to find those mentors and people who have time to invest in you and are willing to, or at least that we're comfortable approaching. I mean, there's all of this, right? So what about career coaches in this setting? Does anyone have experience with that?
Well, I can say that in our college at Drexel, we provide a career coach for anyone moving into a leadership position. So I think the question, Justine, is really interesting in terms of a career coach for research. So I would want to give some thought to that as to who the person is, because they would have to not understand the world of grant writing and the world of academia, not necessarily just, how do you develop a career? So I think it could be possible, it could be helpful if it's the right person. You may also be getting at something that is, I've heard others, and we're thinking about this in terms of sponsorship, that mentorship is, really critical. And we think of mentorship in terms of working with somebody who's senior, who can help navigate, if it's tenure or even non-tenure, track advancement, and also help with one substantive area, right? Which way to go and how to pose questions. And another area that people really need help in is what we're calling sponsorship. Really understanding how to navigate and balance family and academic requirements, one's own identity and multiple identities, and how the intersectionality of gender and race and class and early stage status in an academic environment affects interactions, and how to navigate all of that and think about all of that. So I think it depends. I think when entering a mentorship and or a sponsorship or a career coach, you want to think of, what are my specific questions? What is it that I want help with? And the more specific you can be, then I think it could be successful if you could get the right person. Do you agree, Patty? That's my initial thinking on this.
I do. And, we rely on our institutions often to help us to identify these folks. But I think, maybe your partnerships and relationships in GSA can also help you to make these. And we had a career conversation about networking. It's on the website. So that is one way that you can begin to forge these kinds of relationships. Yeah. So thank you for that. Lindsay.
I'll just add, I've never never thought about a career coach. I do like the idea of having someone a little bit like one step outside of this world to help me examine like maybe what are some of the intrinsic barriers to achieving some of the goals that I've had and maybe just taken a lot longer to get around to. Because a lot of research is just such a long-term process. And I start out with a plan and I still think that the goals are important. And I have mentors with buy-in and that are incredibly supportive, but occasionally, you know, a lot of research is just within us. All of that reading and writing and just waking up in the morning during a pandemic for another day of Zoom meetings, there's a lot of stuff that happens within us that I think maybe stands in our own way. So I could see a career coach, or I don't know if there are other labels for it, but just someone maybe right outside your bubble to help you examine all the pieces.
You know, if I could add to that, Lindsay, I think a role of a career coach is to help you, and I think this is a role of a mentor, is to help you stay very focused, because you can get diffused and have to do a lot of different kinds of service requests and so forth. And I think a mentor, a sponsor, and or a career coach can really help you stay, you know, very, very focused. And we haven't discussed this, but in grant, to be a successful grant writer, you have to publish. And how much time you spend on public, you know, that's a common balance that we all have to make. You know, it takes time to write up our results and to synthesize them and so forth. And then it takes time then to write the grant. And I know that many times, you know, I would just say, okay, this 3 months, just publications, you know, and then it'll prepare me for the next, you know, for writing the grant. And you just kind of have to keep, you know, a balance in terms of that. It's a little bit of a dance.
So when, and I placed a link to this in the chat, when I transitioned from one university to the next, and that move came with promotion and tenure, I participated in a faculty development program that was, you're basically matched with a coach, and you're with a cohort of your peers that are at similar stage in their career and thinking about career trajectory or those types of things. And the coach was very helpful in helping you to evaluate where you're going and what your plans are, and helping you stick to goals and thinking about self-care. And so I came from this environment where you just grind. And, you know, self-care was for other people, right? So I grind all the time, and then had part-time clinical work on this, like moonlighting and all of those types of things, and just no self-care. And my coach would always say, remember to be gentle with yourself, have some grace for yourself. And like, you know, those types of things that just I would never think about. And so it was very helpful to just think about prioritizing the work that you were dedicated to doing. And so it really helped me with that. And the university paid for the coach.
I would mention too that NCFDD, which is the program that Elvin linked there, is it has like different tiers of content. And so I think what Elvin's talking about is a higher tier that is more expensive, but I do have colleagues who have negotiated that into their startup packages. But there are also a lot of, I don't know how much is free, but I know like my institution pays for an institutional license where we don't have quite that level, but we have a lot of other things that we can access there. Sorry, Laura, it looked like you were about to
No,
say.
Zach, I think that's exactly right, to really think of these things at the time of negotiation of a position and what you need to be successful. And having a coach or sponsor, mentor, it can be written into a startup package. Or as you're suggesting, Zach, the university may have, their own programs that can be very helpful.
So we've mentioned a few institution changes so far, and I'm curious if any of you would like to say a little more about how institution changes have changed your research agenda.
Well, I can start this one. The institution change was, for me, I would have never considered it, but the opportunity immediately enhanced my the trajectory of my research. And so that was the bare minimum to make me even consider thinking about uprooting my family and moving. And it was a great opportunity. And it was an opportunity to do work that mattered for people. My original work was exciting and it mattered to me personally because I was in love with these genes, right? The opportunity that I was presented with was connecting the information that I was working hard to try to discover with people who needed the information. So when I came for a visit, when I walked into a clinic and I had the opportunity to see people that would love to participate in my studies and my work, it gave me a new sense of meaning and fulfillment in going to work and writing the grants and trying to get my papers published and all of those things. It was newfound like value in the work that I was doing. It was not just answering questions that I found exciting or interesting or just being right about ideas. It was about making a difference in the lives of people more. And the infrastructure was better for me to do that at the new place. So.
Yeah, I concur. I think, well, you change institutions for lots of different reasons, but to be, very succinct and reflective of my changes, it's opportunity. Where can, impact, where can I have a different and better kind of impact? And sometimes it's, I got to try something new and different. Then of course there's other, there's other considerations, family, what's best for one's family and so forth. But those are, it's opportunity, which I think I heard you say too, Elvin. It's opportunity and having what kind of impact, and then the resources of the environment or the ethos of the environment and its practices and what you want to participate in.
I haven't switched institutions that much. For my postdoc at University of Utah, I did have the wonderful experience of joining a full liberal arts university in addition to an academic health sciences center. And that really expanded my horizons and my commitment to social and behavioral research in a way that being at just a health sciences university couldn't do for me. So in my limited experience, I just say, I think it's a great question and one that not many early career researchers have the luxury of really considering, because they're either aren't, a million opportunities that you can choose between for your first position, or you just have to develop your career a little further before you can consider changing institutions. But I will say that there are policies and practices and people that all shape the types of proposals that will be the most feasible to write, or the projects that will be most successful to conduct at any given institution. I'm learning that it's easier in the pandemic to forge collaborations across institutions, but there are still the policies and the budgetary constrictions around working, across multiple sites that make it harder. So yeah, there's a lot packed into that question.
Well, and even though our time is short today for digging even deeper, I hope that these grant chats will give us opportunities to continue to explore these other aspects of being successful in our research, because that's what so many of us went into this to do, and what we can learn from each other to help to make those paths successful, I think is all good. So I'm really appreciative of those ideas that you all are sharing now, and you're sort of expressing that there's a lot here to unpack, right? So we will have to continue unpacking, I think, over time for sure. We won't solve it all in an hour, but you've given us some great things to think about today, I think.
Maybe just one last question, maybe with the last couple minutes. Areas of your research agenda or trajectory that you've had to drop, kind of maybe the process of making that decision. Maybe you just want to mention one that you're like, I'm going to get this back eventually, or yeah.
Well, I mean, I still love a grant that I submitted very early on in my career that didn't get funded. And I still hold on to it and try to find different ways of getting it funded. It was actually a model for transition care. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's an example of, I just couldn't get it funded for, there were just some methodological issues related to it. I have a really wonderful intervention that I co-constructed with the Senior Center on Depression for older African Americans, and we got successful funding for many years. It's called Get Busy, Get Better, Helping Older Adults Beat the Blues. And the efficacy trial was amazing. We have great publications. And I just gave a talk at GSA to the student group about being stuck in an efficacy phase. And it's been over maybe 8 years now. We can't move it forward in any way. And so I was given the advice, just drop it a little bit, meaning how do I get it into practice? How can all senior centers and agencies use this particular approach, which was just so well endorsed. It just was terrific. And I lament that a great deal. I was given advice from various colleagues, drop it a little bit, go on to your other studies and, build them. And then maybe the clock will turn in the right, in such a way that there'll be an opening. And I'm, to really advance this in a big demonstration project or something like that. So I hold on to these ideas. I try to develop them in different ways. But those have been two big disappointments that I think about a lot.
So one of the interesting challenges that happened for me early in my career was finishing training right as the GWAS era was coming in. So and that's genome-wide association studies. So prior to that time, in the pharmacogenomic space, we were developing assays one base pair at a time. So if you think about studying genes, we were studying one base pair at a time, or one genetic variant at a time. And developing assays may take you 6 months to a year to optimize your assays, create them from scratch, and then use that one assay to study each sample in the lab. So it may take you a year to find out information about one base pair. About the time that I was finishing training, the GWAS studies started to be published, and some of them replicate, and the technology got better and the technology got cheaper. However, I had all of this expertise in developing assays one base pair at a time. So I could attempt to keep trying to get grants funded, studying one base pair at a time, or I could drop that approach and use what the rest of the world was going towards. And so clearly I had to drop the one base pair at a time approach and figure out ways to at least study multiple genes at a time. And that meant additional skills needed to be picked up. And I had to figure out how to learn new methods around large-scale genetic epidemiology type based approaches. Now, some of my original interests still pop back up, but I use a different approach to get the information that I need to determine if those genes are important. I can't use my old approach because technology outpaced the approach that we used 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, or 15 years ago, however long it was. So the technology necessitated the change in terms of the method, the approach. So we have to be flexible and not give up when our old approaches sometimes get outpaced by what the scientific community values. And it doesn't mean that the old approach won't work. It still works, and people still study one base pair at a time in certain places, but it's just you have a harder fight to get a grant funded trying to study one base pair at a time. So I gave up an approach.
I actually have not the same experience because I'm in social and behavioral research, not pharmacology, but I've given up, I think, the methodological love that I have. Just launching a program of research, you realize that you can't do everything. And I so value the collaborations that I've started to form with mentors and colleagues. And I'm thinking of it as more of an opportunity to build a team and have, the expert methodologist on my team rather than trying to be the methods person and everything else. So that's what I've dropped so far. Maybe it's just very optimistic of me, but I hope that the only time I'll stop pursuing the research questions that I think are important is when I'm satisfied that the scientific community has the answers, whether it comes from me, or from others.
Thank you, panelists, for this rich conversation. To bring our session to a close today, I'd like to ask you to maybe share a pearl of wisdom about developing a research trajectory with us. And we only have a few minutes left, so maybe it could be a short phrase or a word or something in that pearl of wisdom that you might pass on to the group.
You're asking really hard questions here. I'll just say a sentence. I mean, grant writing is really hard, but it really enhances your science. I think, again, you have to be true to the scientific questions that you're passionate about, but yet remain very flexible. And have an open mind and diversify a funding portfolio to be successful as you move forward with a research career.
I think I've said it already, but I'll add that I really believe that the research has to come from within you, and what is within you comes from what you're exposed to. So Laura, you mentioned earlier that it was your first comment was that you have to find your passion. And I feel like at times that can be somewhat misleading, because I've seen students and postdocs flail around kind of hunting for a passion project. So I would revise that a little bit to say that there's no shortcut to reading, writing, and discussing your ideas with experts and mentors before reading and writing some more and finding the research within you.
Well, I would agree, and that's a way of finding your passion.
So one of the things that I remember reading, and I would read the science, and I'll read the career section in Science and Nature every week when I was in graduate school and early career. I read the career section every week, and the little short advice pieces about writing, about starting a lab, all of those types of things. I read every week and I saved them. And so I have like all of these career development PDFs that I have saved in my personal libraries. And one of them that I read said that there is no such thing as good writing, just good rewriting. And it was an editorial about however much time you think that it's going to take you to write something, start earlier and get feedback and get multiple drafts done before you give it to someone else to read. Just spend more time writing than you can ever imagine. And then that helps you to set expectations that revisions are going to come, and revisions are a helpful thing and not criticism. Like, you don't have to be devastated when you get reviews back that the reviewers didn't understand the point of your grant. So that concept of there's no such thing as good writing, just good rewriting, helps you to focus on the stories that you tell, and to practice getting those stories understood by other people before those grants go out. And give people time, especially mentors and colleagues that may review your grants. Get it to them early and give them time to read it and get it back to you so that you can make changes. You know, those types of things are what I would say. Just good rewriting.
Thank you. Well, everyone, please join me in thanking our panelists today for their generosity in sharing their time, their experience, and their perspectives. We also want to thank you, our participants, for your questions and comments. And a big thank you to Judy Liu from the GSA staff for all the behind the scenes coordination to make this grant chat possible. And we really hope that we would like to encourage you to reflect on your own research trajectory and identify 1 or 2 tips from today's session that you can use to refine or further develop your research path. We hope you found the discussion helpful, and we hope that you will join us in future grant chats as well. Be on the lookout for a brief survey following the event so that you can provide feedback and help inform future grant chats. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Thank you to the organizing committee and the other panelists. I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
And
thank
to the
you.
attendees.
I definitely learned a lot. Thanks.